peace and happiness are the very nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. All that is necessary is to understand and feel this, and to lead a life to the best of our ability in a way that is consistent with this understanding. That's really all I have to say today. But in case this is not completely clear to you, I will elaborate. For instance, we might object to this statement. The first part of this statement, peace and happiness are the very nature of my being. Our being, our self, is obviously present all the time. And yet we don't feel peace or happiness all the time, so we may object to this statement and say peace and happiness are not the nature of myself because I'm always present. They are experiences that come and go. So in what sense is it true that peace and happiness, I use the words peace and happiness synonymously, in what sense is it true that peace is the very nature of our self or our being, and that it is present at all times, for all people, in all circumstances? And if this is the case, why don't we feel it all the time? I would suggest that it is for this reason. Whilst everybody has a sense of being their self all the time, not everybody knows their self clearly. And it is this lack of clear self-knowledge that is responsible for the veiling of the peace and happiness that are the nature of our being. And this is why self-knowledge really stands at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual traditions. It's why the words "know thyself" were carved above the entrance to the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and as such stand as an invitation at the dawn of Western civilization. An invitation, and by implication a statement, that to know thyself is the most important knowledge, the knowledge upon which all other knowledge must be founded. So what do I mean when I say that everybody has a sense of being their self, but not everybody knows their self clearly? I would suggest that if I were to ask all of you now, are you now having the experience of being myself? Do you all feel, I am myself? I think you would all say yes. In fact, I think if we were to ask any of the 8 billion of us on earth, are you now having the experience of being myself? Everyone would answer yes. I feel that I am myself. So it is in this sense that everyone has a sense of their self, but in almost all cases, our sense of ourself is mixed up with the content of our experience. Thoughts, images, memories, feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, relationships, and so on. So whilst we have a sense of being myself, our sense of ourself is so mixed up with the content of our experience that we don't know ourselves clearly. We don't know our essential self. Our sense of ourself is qualified by our experience. Thoughts, images, feelings, and so on. And for this reason, we make statements such as, I am a man, or I am a woman, I am a mother, or a father, I am a friend, I am a cab driver, or an artist, or a doctor, I am attending a meeting, or I am cold, I am tired, I am lonely, or so on. In each of these statements, we refer to ourself, I, or I am. And then we add to that I am some quality. And the quality is derived from the content of our experience, our thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, relationships, and so on. So although any of these statements betray our knowledge of ourself, in each case our knowledge of ourself is qualified, conditioned, and therefore limited. But we are not always a mother or a father. We are not always a cab driver or a doctor or an artist. We are not always cold or tired or hungry. All these qualities of experience, none of them are essential to us. The only permanent element of our experience is ourself. The fact of simply being or being aware. Everything else is added to us. It remains a while, and then it vanishes. Our being is the constant factor in all changing experience. It is the only element of ourself that remains consistently present throughout all experience. We all feel, I have been the same person all my life. We all feel the self that I am now is the self that I was yesterday, or last year, or when I was a 5-year-old child. Or what is it in our experience that accounts for this undeniable sense of continuity to ourself? Our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions are not continuous. So our sense of always being the same person cannot be derived from them. What element of our experience remains consistently present throughout our life? Just the fact of being or being aware. And therefore only the fact of being or being aware qualifies as ourself. Everything else is added to us and then removed from us. They are like so many garments of clothing that we put on and take off. Only our naked being is essential to us. This unqualified, unconditioned, naked, aware being is what we essentially are. And to know oneself clearly means to know oneself as that. The fact of simply being shines in each of our minds as the knowledge I am, before what I am is qualified by experience. It is for this reason that the name I, in some traditions, is considered to be the highest mantra. That is the most potent sound or thought. Because to take the name I, or I am, and to allow one's mind to be drawn directly to its referent is the direct path to one's essential self. In the Christian tradition, the name I am is said to be the divine name, God's name. Why? Because when our being is divested of all the limitations that it acquires from the content of experience. It can no longer be said to be our being, in the sense of our being belonging to a person. Being has been divested of all the qualities that it derives from human experience, and as such stands as unqualified, unlimited being, God's being. In other words, at the deepest level, we are not really human beings. We are infinite being, clothed in human experience. When our being has been divested of the quality of agitation that it derives from the content of our thoughts, its imperturbable nature is revealed. It is as such known as peace. In other words, peace is what remains of our being when it loses the qualities that it derives from thinking. When our being loses the sense of lack or dis-ease or dissatisfaction that it derives from our feelings, what remains is effortless ease or satisfaction, contentment or happiness. When we experience peace or happiness, we are actually experiencing ourself or our being as it essentially is, after it has been divested of the qualities that it acquires from thinking and feeling. When thinking and feeling arise again, our innate qualities of peace and happiness do not disappear. They are simply veiled, just as the transparent screen is veiled when a movie begins. The screen does not disappear.
I was wondering if you could speak about the fact that often in situations like this, and also maybe sometimes when I'm alone, it's very easy to feel as though I have this understanding and I feel the sense of awareness, but certainly I suppose in situations of conflict, or more often than not when I'm around my family who often drudge up old feelings or old habits, it feels quite difficult to maintain that awareness and to know how to react, I suppose, if you're in a situation of conflict, or if you're in a situation where it feels like the other person is being perhaps argumentative, to know how to approach that, and to also know how much of it is my own ego in that situation. If I walk away from it offended, then perhaps part of it was me, if that makes sense.
Yes, if you walk away offended, then that is the residue of the ego in you. A full-time job and family life is the best circumstance for spiritual practice. Why? Because they provoke all our resistances. Obviously, meetings such as this or extended periods of retreat are very valuable because, at least for the moment, the demands of the world, the need to earn a living, our family, our circumstance, at least for the time being, they're not present. So that these are benign, peaceful circumstances, which give us the best possible opportunity to turn our attention away from the content of experience and go back to our being. But it's an artificial, it's a valid, but it's an artificial circumstance. If we can only be peaceful at a place like this, and as soon as we go home again we get hurt and upset, then it's not real peace, it's a fragile state of mind. So that's why it's important to go back out fully into life, whatever that means for each of us. For most of us, it's some version of work and family, or work and friendship. Because these are the circumstances that really test our establishment in our true nature. And we should welcome them. You should look forward to going home, to see if next time you go home you're a little bit less reactive, less defensive, more open, more understanding, more tolerant, more loving. These would be the indications that you were beginning to be established in your true nature. It doesn't mean to say that because of the deep connections you have with your family that you may not still be triggered by them, but the triggers provoke this feeling in you, but the feeling doesn't take its full form. You just feel the old habit of being triggered, you notice it coming up, you just drop it, and you stay open to your mother, your sister, or whoever it is. You don't close down in response to them, because that closing down, that's the activity of the separate self, that the defense against another, the emotional defense against another.
So really there's nothing that they should be able to say or do that should evoke a reaction, that it's more me, I suppose, than them.
No, it's valid to react. What's important is to understand on whose behalf your reaction is arising. Is your reaction arising on behalf of a hurt self, or is it arising on behalf of truth or love? Your family member may say something or do something that is untrue or unjust or unkind or unloving, and you're not just going to smile sweetly at them. You'll react. It's appropriate that you do react or respond, but your response doesn't come from a feeling of, oh, I have been diminished, I have been disrespected, I am not being loved. It doesn't come from a feeling of lack in yourself. On the contrary, it's because you are free of those feelings that you are able to respond on behalf of love or intelligence. And in doing so, you bring love and intelligence to bear on the situation. Very occasionally, it's necessary to respond firmly or even fiercely. Anyone here who is a parent knows that it's necessary to respond fiercely sometimes to your young children. That fierceness comes from love. You know, I didn't always smile sweetly at my 8-year-old son. Don't have an idea of how you should behave or how this understanding looks, because then you're just copying a form of behavior. That's fake. That's not what we're talking about here at all. What's important is, where does my reaction come from? Does it come from a feeling of us being a separate self? I've been hurt. I've been disrespected. I'm not being loved. If your feeling comes from that place, instead of expressing it, investigate the hurt self. And if you look for the hurt self, you'll never find it. There is no such separate self. You trace your way all the way back to the presence of awareness, recognize yourself as that, and then you return to the conversation. But if your response doesn't come from any such feeling, if you feel that you're responding on behalf of love, understanding, then feel free to express that, however, in whatever way is appropriate in the situation.
Sat at my desk working, and my dad called, and he and I started chatting, and I can't remember what he said, but he said something very nondescript, and sure as eggs are eggs, up came that emotion, and it really bubbled out, and it was that feeling of core shame. Now, I know not to identify with it. I know that it is. It's not me. I get all that, if you know what I mean. But it was an incredibly painful feeling and but yet at the same time, of course, incredibly cathartic, and it was this huge release. But my question, I suppose, is around feelings like that can arise, particularly inspired by family, irrespective of this understanding, this being able to see that nothing is personal, that that feeling that I have in me that was born of a misperception of the way my dad was is an illusion. It's an imagination. It's a false belief. That feeling is still, to some degree, in me, and still, on occasion, bubbles up. What shall I do with it?
Well, the short answer to your question, Simon, is don't do anything to it, or don't do anything more than you are already doing, which is being aware of it. I can relate completely to what you describe. I'm sure we all can in one way or another, but being a man, having a father, my father, as I said earlier, he's passed away now, but he was a little formidable when I was younger. Later on, we were extremely close, and he was a very loving, kind man. But early on, for the 7-year-old boy, he was, like your father, not given to expressing his emotions. It's very English in that way. And that was difficult in exactly the same way that you described for me, the feeling of inadequacy, never good enough, etc. And in fact, I even developed a stutter when I was at that age, just a very slight stutter when I was with him. It started with him. It was a kind of nervousness, a feeling that I'm going to fail, whatever I do. And so I developed this stutter, which I noticed all through my teens and even into my early 20s. It would be provoked by certain types of men that I met. I did it with my housemaster at school, just because he was the same kind of, let's call it reserved, English, formidable character, and it provoked exactly the same feeling, not just the same feeling, but the same response, which in my case was this sudden. And it lasted for a while, even into my early 20s, and this was, just as you described, a kind of residue of a feeling that had been laid down very early on in my life, a kind of trauma that was laid down early in life. And long after the stimulus had disappeared, long after my father and I had reconciled, we had a very close, loving relationship, long after the stimulus had disappeared, the residue of the feeling remained in me and could still be provoked in certain situations. And I'm sure everyone can relate in some way to some feeling of inadequacy, shame, fear, guilt that was laid down early on in life, very often due to parental relationship. Something that happened early in life that we were too young to deal with, too young to cope with, that we dissociated from. It laid down a feeling. So what is to be done about it? Really exactly what you're doing, which is to be aware of it. See, the reason we aren't aware of these feelings for so long is because they're too painful. They're unbearable. And we do anything we can to avoid them. Substances and activities are the two main ways. As soon as we feel one of these core, deep, ancient core feelings rising in us, the first thing we feel, this is unbearable. And then we do something, go towards something or someone in order to distract ourselves from them. And for most of us, it's substances or activities, which can develop into addictions. So what's the first thing to do? Exactly what you're doing. Do what you didn't do all the way through your childhood, which is turn towards the feeling instead of turning away from it, escaping into a fantasy, into objects, into substances, whatever it was. Do the opposite. Turn towards the feeling. And in other words, become aware of it. Allow it rather than repress it. Let it bubble up into the light of awareness, because that's what it's doing. The feeling is seeking liberation. It's been buried in the body for decades, dictating the way we think and feel and act and relate from behind the scenes, ruining our relationships, for instance, one of the common ways it shows up in our lives. But it's always been below the threshold, but below the radar of the waking state mind. We've always kept it at bay. So the first thing to do is what it's trying to do. It's trying to seek liberation. It's trying to come up into the light of awareness, because that is the beginning of its release and dissolution. So the first thing to do is stop avoiding it. Stop reaching for the fridge or the bottle or the YouTube clip or whatever it is. Turn to face the feeling that we previously considered unbearable. In fact, it's not the feeling itself that is unbearable. It is our resistance to it that makes it seem to be unbearable. As soon as you remove that resistance, it's just, as you say, a knot in your stomach, which is perfectly bearable.
Sorry, just to quickly about that thing. I think what I found was, had it not been for my father, it may not have come up. So it can, you talk about the resistance or whatever, and bringing the attention to it, and you just sense something's a little off. Yes. But then it needs that.
Yes.
And obviously he's got a unique talent for that.
Yes, and in that case, instead of hanging up as you might once have done and sworn under your breath or out loud about your father, or complain to your wife that your dad did that. No, do the opposite. Be grateful that your dad called and provoked this feeling. He didn't create the feeling. It was there already. He provoked it. And it's good that he did provoke it, because that brings it out of hiding in the body up into the light of awareness. And these feelings have to be liberated from their hiding places in the body. They have to come up into the light of awareness and dissolve. So it's very good. The process that's taking place with you is very good. Just whenever you feel these feelings, turn towards them. Stand as the space of awareness. As the space of awareness, say to this feeling, all my life I've been avoiding you. Now I'm going to do the opposite. You're welcome. You can come in. You can stay inside me for as long as you like.
So I do welcome them now, but still sometimes they're not forthcoming. And like I said, I don't want to.
That's fine. If they're not forthcoming, don't have an agenda with them either way. Remember, you're the presence of awareness. The space of this room has no agenda with what takes place in this room. The space of this room, if this meeting had been cancelled this morning, the space of the room wouldn't have minded. If this meeting was not forthcoming, it has no vested interest in what does or doesn't take place inside this room. Well, the presence of awareness is like that. It has no vested interest in whether these feelings show up or not. If they don't show up, that's fine. If they're provoked and they come up, that's fine. But remain the presence of awareness, and be sure that you're not doing this in order to get rid of these feelings. If you were doing that, then you wouldn't truly be standing as the presence of awareness. You'd be standing as the ego, trying to get rid of itself by pretending to welcome itself. So you have to be sure that that's why you've heard me say it before. That's why I sometimes suggest that the test with such feelings, we must be able to answer yes to the question, can I live with this feeling forever? So just take this direct path back to yourself and stay there. Don't ask what's next. And that will, in your language, purify the vasanas, which are these deep-seated, innate tendencies, for instance, that Simon was talking about earlier, the early trauma that is laid down in the body. These deep-seated patterns of either thinking or feeling, they don't need to be purified before we can recognize our true nature. It happens the other way around. We recognize our true nature, and that recognition purifies these deep-seated tendencies.